In our daily lives, we are constantly tied to the concept of time. We check the clock, measure our commitments, and worry about the future. However, there is a moment of transcendence when this concern dissolves. When we understand the true nature of time, we realize it is not separate from us. We become time itself. This state of being eliminates the division between past, present, and future. Everything is now, and we are always in the right moment, as there is no wrong moment. This is the path without obstacles, without fear, that frees us from suffering. Living without fear and obstacles is living with the awareness of emptiness. Understanding that nothing is fixed or permanent makes us realize that we are part of an interconnected whole. We are not passive observers but absolute presence, fully acting in every moment. This realization removes the need to procrastinate or to do things halfway, because there is no tomorrow. Everything happens in the present, and it is in this now that we give our best. This understanding frees us from emotional pain and the tendency to dwell on the past. We are not like cattle, destined to ruminate on the same painful experiences. We are conscious beings, capable of living in the present moment without carrying the unnecessary weight of our memories. This awareness allows us to see and hear the world clearly and directly, without judgment. Just like the crowing of a rooster, which is simply a sound, without adjectives like beautiful or ugly, our perception of things does not need to be burdened with opinions or emotions. The sound is just what it is, and what has passed does not need to be relived. When we let go of preferences and aversions, we begin to experience life more fully and genuinely. This is the path to true liberation. The practice of wisdom involves recognizing that all experiences have value and that no element is fixed. Wood, when being sanded, may require both coarse and fine sandpaper, depending on the stage of the process. Similarly, we, as human beings, have different functions and capacities that evolve over time. We can transform, adapt, and refine our skills, just like coarse sandpaper that, with use, becomes fine and delicate. This flexibility allows us to evolve and free ourselves from all sadness and suffering, reaching the state of nirvana, contentment with existence and inner peace. Let's continue with the second part, focusing on reflection on detachment, compassion, and how human experiences are viewed through a spiritual lens. If you are enjoying this content and feel it can bring more peace and wisdom to your life, don't forget to like the video. And if you are not yet part of our community, subscribe now and keep following for more transformative teachings. The practice of detachment also teaches us to live more compassionately. By understanding that nothing is permanent, that everything is constantly changing, we can develop a broader vision of the beings around us. Each person, just like each object or situation, has a specific function at a given moment, but these functions are not fixed. Just like sandpaper that starts rough and over time becomes fine and smooth, we, as humans, can evolve, transform, and refine our own skills and roles. This flexibility is essential for the practice of compassion. By recognizing that each of us has a unique function, and that this function can change, we open up space to understand and accept the diversity of human experiences. We cannot expect everyone to be or act the same way, but we can develop an appreciation for differences and learn from them. This is what frees us from rigidity and suffering. There is a Buddhist story that illustrates the essence of compassion. It is said that a princess, in her infinite kindness, found a man covered in wounds. He was in such a state that no cloth or cotton could touch his skin without causing pain. In an act of pure compassion, the princess began to lick his wounds, relieving his suffering. This act symbolizes the transformative power of compassion. It knows no disgust or repulsion and acts only to alleviate the suffering of another being. In the Buddhist tradition, this story is often told to demonstrate that true compassion makes no distinctions between beings, and it goes beyond personal preferences or judgments. Following this line of thought, we must remember that compassion must also extend to those we consider enemies or those who cause us pain. The true challenge of compassionate practice is being able to feel tenderness even for those who harm us. Compassion is not exclusive to victims. It must also include aggressors, for it is often the lack of love and understanding that leads a person to commit acts of violence or cruelty. This approach may be difficult to accept, but there is deep wisdom in it. When we pray for the healing and well-being of all beings, including those who hurt us, we acknowledge that all share the same fundamental suffering. In Buddhism, this is represented by the concept of dukkha, the universal truth of suffering. And by recognizing that all beings are trapped in this cycle of pain, we can expand our compassion to everyone. There is a story of a mother whose children were kidnapped. She prayed daily for their release, asking for protection and safety for her children. However, a nun suggested that, in addition to praying for her children, she also include the kidnappers in her prayers. This suggestion was initially unsettling, but the mother accepted the advice and began to pray for the kidnappers to find peace and wisdom. A few days later, the children were released unharmed. This example shows the power of praying for all beings, including those who harm us. By expanding our vision of compassion to all, without distinctions, we begin to see the world more completely. It's not about forgiving cruelty, but understanding that suffering is present in everyone and that healing one affects the healing of all. This is the path of true compassion and wisdom. As we deepen our understanding of suffering, we realize that it is an inevitable part of the human experience. However, suffering can also be a source of great wisdom. When we go through difficult experiences, we have the opportunity to learn about ourselves and the world in a way that would be impossible in times of peace. This is the essence of the first noble truth in Buddhism, the recognition that suffering dukkha is part of life. But suffering in itself is not the end. It has a cause, and when we understand this cause, we can overcome it. Often, suffering arises from our resistance to impermanence. We want things to stay the same. We cling to people, objects, and experiences, expecting them to bring us continuous happiness. However, when these things change or disappear, we feel pain. This is where wisdom begins to emerge. By recognizing that everything is impermanent, we can begin to detach and, in doing so, reduce our suffering. This doesn't mean we stop loving or caring about the world, but that we start accepting change as a natural part of life. This understanding leads us to another fundamental lesson. Form is empty, and emptiness is form. This idea, taken from the Heart Sutra, is one of the most profound teachings in Buddhism. It suggests that all the forms we perceive in the world, whether physical, emotional, or mental, are empty of a permanent essence. Nothing in the universe has a fixed or intrinsic identity. At the same time, emptiness, which may seem like a frightening concept to some, is the very foundation of all forms. In other words, without emptiness, without change and impermanence, there would be no possibility of existence or transformation. This wisdom is what allows us to see the world clearly. When we abandon rigid distinctions between what is good and what is bad, what is beautiful and what is ugly, we begin to perceive things as they truly are. This frees us from the trap of constant judgment and allows us to experience life in a more direct and authentic way. However, this practice is not easy. Just as in meditation, where we learn to sit for long periods, enduring physical discomfort, in life we must also learn to stay with uncomfortable emotions without fleeing from them. In the beginning, it is common for the mind to seek distractions. We think about time, look at the clock, imagine how others are reacting around us. These distractions are ways to escape the present moment and the discomfort it brings. But when we remain firm, without giving in to distractions, we begin to notice something extraordinary. Discomfort, like everything else, is impermanent. Pain comes and goes, just like thoughts and emotions. This realization gives us a new perspective on suffering. It doesn't need to be feared or avoided. Instead, we can embrace it as a natural part of life and learn from it. Suffering is, in fact, an opportunity to grow and develop deeper wisdom. When we face suffering with courage and acceptance, something inside us begins to change. We develop resilience and a greater capacity to deal with life's challenges. The wisdom of suffering teaches us to be more compassionate, not only with others but also with ourselves. Instead of judging ourselves for feeling pain or for failing, we learn to treat ourselves with kindness and patience. This is the first step toward true liberation. Thus, wisdom is not something we acquire by reading books or listening to lectures. It arises from direct experience of life, especially the experiences of suffering. And the more we accept this reality, the closer we come to the state of Nirvana, the state of inner peace and contentment that does not depend on external circumstances. This is the path that frees us from all sadness and dissatisfaction and allows us to live with a sense of fullness and inner freedom. On the path to wisdom, it's not enough to intellectually understand the ideas of impermanence and emptiness. True liberation happens when we integrate these teachings into our daily lives and our way of interacting with the world. The Heart Sutra teaches us that form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, but this understanding only becomes liberating when we apply it to our everyday experiences. When we live according to this truth, we stop clinging to objects, emotions, and fixed identities. This is the beginning of liberation. Living in the present, with full awareness and acceptance, requires us to abandon our dualistic mind. We often categorize everything we perceive as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, and with that, we trap ourselves in cycles of attachment and aversion. However, when we look at the world with a clear and detached view, we realize that these divisions are constructions of our mind. The forms we see around us do not have, in themselves, permanent or intrinsic characteristics. They are temporary manifestations, and when we accept this, the suffering caused by the incessant search for security or pleasure begins to disappear. This practice of detachment does not mean indifference or apathy. On the contrary, it makes us more present and engaged with the world around us. When we stop worrying about the future or regretting the past, we can dedicate ourselves fully to the present moment, acting with wisdom and compassion. Thus, every action we take becomes an expression of our best self. We don't push our responsibilities or duties aside, thinking we will do better tomorrow. What we have is now, and in it, we can offer the best of ourselves. This clarity and presence are the foundation for cultivating a more compassionate and wise life. When we recognize that all beings are equally subject to impermanence and suffering, our compassion expands. We see that, just like us, all beings are trying to deal with pain, attachment, and confusion. This realization deeply connects us with others and helps us develop genuine love and a willingness to alleviate the suffering of all beings. At this point, compassion is not just a feeling of pity or sympathy. It is an active force that drives us to act in ways that benefit everyone. When we feel compassion for those who harm us, as discussed earlier, we are recognizing that the harm they cause is the result of their own suffering and ignorance. Instead of responding with anger or judgment, we respond with understanding and empathy, knowing that healing can only come through the inner transformation of everyone involved. The path of wisdom and compassion culminates in the practice of Nirvana, which is not a mystical or distant state, but a state of inner peace and contentment that is available to all of us, here and now. Nirvana is simply the cessation of suffering, which occurs when we stop resisting reality as it is. By accepting impermanence, emptiness, and the interconnectedness of all things, we find freedom. This freedom is not an escape from life, but a way of living fully, without the chains of attachment and aversion. Buddhist master the Dalai Lama is a living example of this practice. Even in the face of great challenges, such as the invasion of Tibet and exile, he chooses to respond with compassion, not only for the victims but also for the invaders. His worldview is based on wisdom that comes from a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings. He teaches us that to truly transform the world, we must first transform ourselves. This begins with the practice of Dharma, the path of truth, which guides us beyond the illusions of the mind and brings us into contact with ultimate reality. Therefore, the legacy we leave for future generations depends on our ability to cultivate wisdom and compassion now. Like the masters of the past, we must keep the tradition of teaching and practicing these values alive so that those who come after us can build a better, wiser, and more compassionate world. Our task is to pass the baton with joy and confidence, knowing that future generations have the potential to overcome the failures and limitations of those before them. When we act with this intention, we are, in fact, building a legacy of love and understanding. Each act of compassion, each act of wisdom, becomes a seed that will flourish in the hearts of those who come after us. And so, we contribute to a world where all beings can live in harmony, peace, and happiness. If this video inspired you and brought new reflections, like it to support the channel and share it with someone who can also benefit from these messages. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos that will guide you further on the path to inner peace.